Well, as we'll keep saying here, we're constantly learning. I do not like to call myself an expert because I learn new things about Jira on a daily basis, but I do my best to try to learn as much as I can, and I like to share what I know as well. I expect some of you to probably even know more about Jira than I do. But as far as my background, I started my working career as a business operations and intelligence analyst, eventually got pulled into a Scrum Master role from someone that we all may know pretty well. His name is Marcelo, a fantastic coach. And he pulled me into a transformation that we were having at the organization, got me up to speed with Agile, got us trained in Scrum and just the ways of operating in an Agile environment. Absolutely loved it. Took to it like a fish in water. And that was my first experience with Jira. And like I said, I won't call myself an expert. I learn things every single day. And so today I would like to walk us through the workflows in Jira, which are an incredibly important part of getting work done from start to finish. And here, let me share my screen. I have a little bit of a presentation. And also, currently working with just one screen today. So if you have questions and you want to put them in the chat, please feel free to put them in the chat, but just understand I may not see them as I'm trying to go through the presentation, but also open to interruptions. If you guys have any questions while I'm going through the machinations of setting up workflows and using Jira, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. More than happy to hit pause and give you any information that I can. So again, I use Jira. I've been using Jira for about 7 years now, 6 years now. So I'm starting out as a Scrum Master, just doing the best I can to help guide development teams on creating some pretty cool products where I was in my organization at the time, and really like the software. I think it's absolutely incredible. Atlassian has come a long way since 7 years. They continue to release updates and upgrades and new products, and that's why I say I do learn things every single day. I just learned some pretty cool customization just earlier this week, which we won't touch on here, but just understand that Jira can almost quite literally run your life if you want it to. So we'll dive into workflows here. I heard some mixed experience with Jira in terms of I'm new to Jira. I've been using Jira for a long time. We are going to walk through how to use the workflows, maybe some best practices, at least the things that I've learned at the organizations that I've been at, and some of the things I've tried to implement. But I would like to make a call out at least that if you are someone who wants to learn about Jira, learn about the Atlassian product suite in general, Atlassian has a pretty generous free tier that you can sign up for as an individual and create your own Jira environment for yourself that you can fool around in. That's very feature rich. So I do suggest doing that as well. As you know, I think hands-on experience is another level above kind of watching someone walk through and getting experience just through having someone else show you how to do things. I think you learn a lot more and you retain more information if you get hands-on and do it yourself. So I would definitely suggest if you want to get more familiar with Jira and just Atlassian in general, sign up for the free tier. It's fabulous, and they give you a lot to work with there. And I think secondly, and I don't know if I've just been lucky in this or I just have talked my way or worked my way into particular situations, but if your organization uses Jira, try to talk to your Jira administrators and see if they will give you a layer of administrative access that you may be able to do some things on your own. Hopefully, and I'll just give a quick anecdote about what I had done recently, which kind of like led me down the path of being an administrator. I was given admin access to my organization that I'm in now, and still being a novice, quote unquote. I'm still learning, like I said, every day. I was making some changes in some things that were having cascading effects on some other individuals that were using Jira, and I got brought into the overall Jira administration group where we have meetings on change management, and we have a service. Someone mentioned they use JSM, the Jira Service Management product. We use that to track and make changes in Jira. And I will say I single-handedly, the changes that I was making single-handedly required the organization to set up a more organized fashion in which changes are made in Jira. And honestly, it was a great learning experience. And I continue to learn every day. And I think that I've come to get a lot of experience on using Jira and the best practices for tracking changes and using JSM along with Jira software. And Jira Product Discovery, which is a whole another product that they released recently, and I think it's fabulous. So anyway, today we're going to work with workflows. We're going to start from very beginning. For those of us who are a little more unfamiliar than some other folks, we'll just walk through what a workflow is. So workflow is how you transition from a state of creation of I have this thing that I need to do to I am now working on this thing to I am now done with this thing. So that is a workflow. It is, most of us are probably familiar with user stories, bugs, epics, spikes, those type of things, enablers. All of those follow a particular workflow. They can all follow the same workflow, or they can all have their own workflows, which is part of the customization available in Jira, which again is fantastic. So there's three things that exist within a workflow. Those are the statuses. So that is your to-do, your in progress, you're done. You can have a review status in there, a testing status in there. But regardless, all of those things fall within three, what Jira describes as status categories. And those status categories are to do, in progress, and done. So if you have a status called backlog, it's probably going to be in your to-do status category. If you have a status like in development, you probably have that in your in progress category. And if you have something called done, which I think most of us do, that will fall into your done status category, aptly named. Or if you have something like canceled, your canceled status would probably also fall within your done status category. And then within those statuses, you have what Jira calls transitions. So that is your action between one step to another step. And what I'll show today for our use case is a similar workflow to what I use at my current organization for what we call our product solution projects. Those are the development teams that are actually working on the solutions and updating products and creating new products to help our customers use our software better. So those are our transitions. Those are your actions between statuses. And then in terms of a resolution, you would think, well, isn't a resolution just done? It is, but it isn't. So a resolution in Jira, Jira, even though you might have a status category or a status called done or canceled, for the specifics of Jira and their workflows, they have a particular field called a resolution field, and that resolution field needs to be set in order for a work item or an issue type to be considered done in the eyes of Jira software. There's some functionality and some metadata behind the scenes that gets updated and changed based off of the resolution field value. So you may consider the fact that you had moved something to done, but in the eyes of Jira, if it does not have a resolution on it, it's not considered done. And having the resolution will affect dashboards, reporting, some of the other functionality within Jira itself. So it's important to keep in mind that when you are updating workflows and creating workflows, when you get to the end of your workflow, it's a really good idea to set that resolution value. And I'll show some of that in here. And in fact, Jira considers the resolution value to be so important that it has its own configuration by itself in the system settings, in your issue settings, when you go into Jira and start configuring your things. And I'll show you that here as well. But that was something that I learned recently too, just probably a few months ago. I was seeing things that were done but the fact that the resolution wasn't set on these things, they were still showing up on reports, and I was getting questions around why from users, hey, this thing is done, but it's still showing up on this report. And come to find out that it didn't have the resolution set as part of the workflow. So important to keep that in mind. Workflows have they fall within a waterfall of configuration in Jira. You have the individual workflow itself, which is where you have your statuses and your transitions, and there's a whole heap of customization that you can do in your workflows, which I will touch on here during the presentation. Those workflows fit into workflow schemes, and those schemes are then assigned to projects. So there's a lot that you can do here. If you work in a larger organization, and I'll touch on this here too, a naming convention I think is incredibly important. If you have an organization that may have dozens to hundreds of projects and they have different product types, for example, you have Jira Software, you have Jira Service Management, you have Jira Product Discovery. All of these different project types can have their own workflows and their own workflow schemes. And then within each one of those categories of Jira Software, you could have different teams that have different workflows that all work within the Jira Software project suite. So something that we've done at the organization is set up a really consistent naming convention so that when you're going into the back and going to your system settings, you're not getting completely discombobulated by seeing potentially hundreds of workflows across hundreds of projects and making changes to those things. It becomes very difficult as you're trying to find a needle in a haystack because these organizations are complex. They can be complicated. You have hundreds of different people working across dozens of departments, and they could all use Atlassian. They can all use different products within Atlassian, and the functionality that they have is very similar between them in terms of having boards and workflows and issue types and screens and all of the different configurations you can do in the background. So anyway, I thought just as a tip for those of you who are getting into maybe a more complicated nature, you're setting up more workflows, you're setting up more projects. This is the naming convention that I use and that we use. So it's broken into the project type. So I have the Jira Software, Jira Service Management, the Jira Product Discovery, what the configuration type is. And this falls into the fact that you can have configuration types for your issues and for your screens. And so for today, we're just using the workflow. But if you were to have a screen, you would say screen. Or if you had issue configuration, you'd put issue there. And then in terms of the issue type, again, user stories, bugs, requests, ideas across all of the different product suites. It depends on the project that you have set up and how your teams are using it and what issue types that they need to get their work done. So it's important to make sure that you tag that issue type because each issue type can have its own workflow. It's important to have that. In terms of the project group, so this is nomenclature used at my organization. Maybe have something similar, maybe have something completely different. But again, we have product solution teams, which are development teams are developing the actual product. We have support teams. We have customer service teams that use our Jira Service Management. And we have product management teams that use the Jira Product Discovery product. So again, you can configure it all the way from the issue type to the type of configuration that you have to the group that will be using it. Typically, again, if you have a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, hundreds of product solution teams, it's important to know that the workflow you're changing is for product solution teams, and it helps you when it comes time to configure all of these different projects that you don't need to go to a couple dozen different workflows and change them all in one spot. You can assign this workflow to a scheme, and that scheme can be applied across all of the projects at one time. So it's really easy for you to configure in one spot. The administrative overhead can become incredibly complex when you reach a certain scale. So keeping your naming convention in such a way where you can keep track of those things and keep track of the configurations is important. And then last but not least is the version. We use, in terms of the version, the year and the month in which the workflow or the configuration was changed or updated or created. So that also helps you keep track of when something may have potentially been changed. Was it changed just last week? Was it changed last month? Was it years ago the last time this thing was updated? So those are all, I think, important variables to keep track of. And again, this was learned over time. This was certainly not overnight. And if you're at the beginning of your Jira organization journey, it you may not have the complex and complications to necessitate this type of naming convention, but I have a feeling that if once you get used to Jira and your organization really dives into it, this is a really good starting spot to go into. So keep that in mind when you're creating these things, and I'll be using that during our demo today as well. So what we're going to do today is we're going to create a new project. We are going to configure a workflow within that project. We're going to add some statuses. We're going to add some transitions. There are some configurations, and not some, there's actually a lot of customization that you can use on your transitions. Things from conditions to validators, post functions, there's properties that you can set. There's a whole, like I said, Jira, I continue to learn about Jira. There's unlimited seemingly amount of customization that you can do. And in between your transitions, you can present a screen to your users. If you need particular fields to be filled out between statuses, it's a good idea to give the user a screen while they're changing the status to fill in notes, or if there's screenshots, or they need to enter a date for something, or they need to enter a score for something. It really, like I said, the customization is incredible. It will fit any strategy that your company wants to use to go from 0 to 100, from the start of your workflow to the end of your workflow, and actually getting work done. And then capturing all of the data. Again, the data that we capture is also really important, so that it can be used on reporting and it can be used to make decisions. So it's important to track all of that as well. And the workflows are our main point of contact in our projects to determine what still needs to be done, what is done, what's currently in progress in flight. So I think the workflows are an incredibly important part of Jira and just part of getting work done in general. And this is what the workflow is going to look like by the end of today, hopefully. We're going to add some statuses, add some transition screens, a couple configurations. There's a lot that it can do. I'm not going to touch on everything. Like I said, we could spend weeks trying to configure our workflows and adding all of the different conditions that we want. So hopefully this is what we'll get to.
Yeah. Steven, and my apologies because I'm having issues with my camera. It's not turning back on. But does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Any questions for Steven? Nope. Okay. All right. Just checking.
All right. We'll keep going. Yeah. No. Thank you. Yeah. Like I said, feel free to speak up, unmute yourself if you do have questions. Once we start getting into the, I guess, the meat and potatoes, as they say. And then last but not least, I did want to share this diagram, which comes directly from Atlassian. I reference this diagram a lot when I'm making configuration changes in Jira. When we have a request that comes in, like I said, we use Jira Service Management, and I highly suggest that you have some type of service management platform that you use to intake change requests, track your change requests, get them done. And this diagram essentially walks you through where you need to go to make particular changes to your configuration. Like I said, because there is a lot of customization that can be done, there's a lot of different screens that you need to go to, a lot of different pieces of the configuration that you need to go to. And this helps you keep track of, like, if I want to add a screen to a particular issue type, where do I need to go to do that? If I need to add a transition to a particular workflow, where do I go to do that? So I also want to point out the fact, and that's why this is on here, is that Atlassian has a lot of really good documentation that I think is very simple to understand some of the complexities that goes into making all of the changes that you would like to all of your screens, your fields, your workflows, everything within a project in Jira. So feel free to use the Atlassian website to your benefit, because there is a lot on there. and they do a really good job of keeping everything up to date when they do new releases or they make changes to things. It's a really good resource. So make sure you favorite that Atlassian website. And that's it for just the beginning here, walking through some of the basics and hopefully give you a tip on how you can name things, because like I said, you can reach a point where your head is spinning because you have so many different configurations to keep track of. And if a request comes in to make changes to one of those configurations, you don't want to spend 30 minutes looking for what it is that you need to change. So that's that. So anyway, we're going to dive right in. We're going to start from 0 and go all the way through to having a completed workflow. So right now we need to set up a project. We're going to go here. We're going to create a software development project. I think all of us are familiar with Scrum. I'm going to go ahead and just set up a Scrum project. And in order for the configurations that we make to apply to these projects, we want to make sure that we select a company managed project. If you select a team managed project, each team, which will lead to a large headache, again, if you have a lot of projects, you want to make sure that you can manage it at a high level and apply those changes across a swath of projects and make sure that everyone is using the same workflow. So make sure you select the manage by company. And we're going to use the our product solution here. We have a product named D, so we'll go ahead and create a project for that. So we have a new team, we have a new product called D, and set that up, hit continue, and you're taken to your project page here. So this is what it looks like when you set up a new project. First thing first, we want to go to our workflow, and to do that, you go to your project settings, and on here, I want to also point out this summary tab too, which I think is really neat. They did a good job of keeping all of your configurations that are applied to a project all in one spot using this summary tab on here. So this shows you the issue type scheme that you're using, the workflow scheme that you're using, the screen scheme that you're using, the field scheme that you're using. So if you ever question, I don't know what this project is using in terms of issues, go to the summary tab and it'll give you a breakdown of everything that's applied to that project. For now, we're going to focus on the workflow. So there is a default workflow that can be configured when you are creating these projects. I'm using the free version right now. I haven't made any changes to the configuration. So this is just the default workflow that Atlassian gives you when you create a new project. And it gives you we're probably all familiar with these again, Storybug, epics, tasks, subtasks. But we know that we got a request from our team. They need more steps in their process. They need to be able to track work a little more granularly, other than just to do, in progress, and done. So we do want to set up a new workflow that gives them the ability to see where things are in the process a little bit better than just having those 3 different statuses. So we'll start out with editing this workflow. And they give you a text and a diagram. I prefer to use the diagram. I'm a very visual person, and I just think that this helps you see how the workflow is working as well, rather than that text rundown. And for now, what I would like to do is we're just going to go through. We're gonna head into an issue here in a second, but I want to show you what that is and why they do that. We want to add a new status called ready. If you remember, for our diagram, and we want to create a transition from to do to ready. So we have something that we need to do. We've talked about it. We've gathered the requirements. The team has spoken about it. We've maybe given it a score, and now we want to move it to a state of ready. So we're going to do this. We want to go, and again, transitions are actions. Statuses are a static thing. That's why they're called to do, ready, in progress, and canceled. And so the fact that this is an action, I like to name them similar to verbs. So we'll name this transition is ready. Add it, and you'll see here that Jira is giving us an error message. We cannot perform this operation on a draft workflow. So when you go into your project and you edit a workflow, what it does is it creates a draft version of your active workflow for your project. It makes you It allows you to make some changes, but there are some changes that you are limited on doing when a workflow is active on a project. So this is what you're telling you. So we can't create this transition right now on this draft workflow. So we need to take it a little one step further and go from what Jira calls an active workflow, copy this active workflow and create an inactive version of this workflow. And the inactive version of workflows, you have full customized ability to do anything you want to. So we are limited here. So I'm going to go ahead and just discard this draft. We're going to go to our settings here. And again, so this is our scheme. So again, this scheme can be applied to multiple projects. And within the scheme, you have these workflows. Each workflow can have its own, each issue type, can have its own workflow. So we want to make sure that we grab this workflow because we want to edit this workflow within the project. And we're going to go to our backend settings here. It falls under the issues tab. We're going to go to workflows. And we're going to find that workflow. Hopefully it's here. You can see it here. It's in the, it's right now included in our product dissolution project under the simplified workflow. All we need to do is copy it.
Stephen, I have a question.
Yeah.
So is it true that within the project, within each project space, right? If you configure a team board a particular way, like the Scrum board with the statuses, right? That has to be true for all the teams inside that project space. Is that true? Are there certain things that has to be standardized across the teams in the one project space?
Yeah, so if you're, well, I wouldn't say within that project space, I'd say within the group that is using this particular workflow. For example, if you have this workflow applied to a dozen different product solution projects, each one of those product solution projects needs to have the board configured in the same way, especially in terms of the columns that you see on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're going to run into issues of work items just disappearing once you make a transition to a column that does not exist on that board.
Right. We see it in our team boards, like our Scrum team boards, right? Mm-hmm. We have multiple teams, Scrum teams, inside the one project space, right? And so we typically what I've seen is like, oh, we have to configure the flow, right? Of that Scrum board, the columns in that Scrum board, the same across those teams. If not, if somebody wants something different, they have to go create a different project space and then add that team to a different project space.
That's right. Yeah, because these workflow schemes are applied at the project level. So all of the boards within that project have to follow a very, the same configuration. Otherwise, you will run into those issues.
Correct.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Cool. All right, we'll keep going. So again, we're going to use our naming convention. This is a Jira software project. We are editing a workflow. We want to use this workflow only on user stories. We don't need this workflow for bugs. Bugs can follow a different workflow. We're following the scheme for our product solutions group, and we're making the change today in October 2024. So let's say this is a workflow for user stories in the product solutions. Helps to give a description to things as well if you're hunting around for here. I'll name this a little bit here. We'll go to 11. Okay, so now we are currently editing an inactive workflow. You can see here the little tag, currently inactive. And now we have full reign to freeform this entire workflow. We can add any statuses we would like. We can add any transitions we would like, and we're not going to run into any errors. We just need to remember that once we're done with this and we save it, that we apply this to the workflow scheme that our project is using, so that this workflow is now applied to that particular project. So something that we do at my organization is we make sure that people understand and meet particular goals in terms of getting things to ready. I think a lot of us who work in Agile have heard of something called the definition of ready, along with the definition of done. So in order for us to go through a status of to do to ready, there are particular things that need to be filled out and checkboxes that need to be made to verify the fact that the team is actually ready to take this on. So we like to add this is ready status and transition here. And there's some configuration that we will walk through that is applied to part of this transition, which shows a screen to the users. They get to see the definition of ready. They get to verify the fact that this item does meet the definition of ready. The entire team understands that it is ready to go. It can be brought into a sprint and planned. And then from ready, we start our work. We just go to in progress. And if we're working in software, once the development team has finished their development, we're probably going to go to testing. So I want to make sure that we transition to testing. And I'll touch on these alls here. So when we originally created this workflow, when it was created by Jira, all of the items had this all option on them. This means that any status within the workflow can move to the to-do status. It can move to the in-progress status or the done status. If we want some more control around the workflow, around making sure that work moves from A to B to C to D, and not going back through the workflow in a random pattern, we can make sure that we uncheck this. But for now, we're going to leave that one checked. But we do want to make sure that we can build a workflow that we understand that ready will always lead to in progress. We don't want to go from to do to in progress, or from to do to testing, or even from to do to done, at least at this point. We want to make sure that we're walking through we're progressing through our workflow as we intend to. And after we're done testing, there's typically a review that's done. At our organization, we have product owners. Our product owners are the last step in the process to make sure that the customer asked for A, B, and C, and with this thing being developed, the customer will actually receive A, B, and C. So it'll come to the product owner. They'll do their final review, and then hopefully all is good, and we'll say it's completed. So we'll add another transition here. Again, we don't want everything to move through to done. We want to make sure that we're following our progression here. And one last status that we have, canceled. So some things can reach any point in our workflow here, and we may realize that in the to-do status, we don't actually need this thing, so we can just cancel it. Or we've gotten all the way through to testing and realized that it's no longer important enough, that the market shifted, that the customers don't need this thing anymore, so we can go ahead and cancel it. And I add this to our workflow, and I'll go ahead and check the allow all statuses to transition to this one, because at any point in time, we can realize that we don't actually need this thing. And there is an option, I guess I'll call this out too. I think if you have been using Jira for a little while, at least you may know that you can actually delete issues in your backlog rather than cancel them, and deleting them will basically wipe them from the database. And this is another thing that I learned, we're always learning, that if you have some third-party integrations with your Jira, for example, if you are integrated with a data platform, like Snowflake or some other database, if you delete an issue from Jira, it can cause havoc through your transition process, where Snowflake will grab data from Jira, and if it no longer sees an issue there because you deleted it, it can cause a headache for your engineers. It can cause a headache in the database. It can cause errors. So what we do is we do not allow folks to delete anything. We just send it to canceled. That way, our data in our database is nice and happy, and that keeps our engineers happy. Keeps, stops the headaches on their end. So we make sure that we have a canceled status for all of our workflows so that we can transition to them. So now I'm going to go. So now we've set up our workflow. We've added, I guess also for reference here, I'll bring up this screen. These are the status categories that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. You have your to do, your in progress, and your done. Those are the three categories that Atlassian uses to group your statuses into whether or not it's something that's in progress or done, or it's not, hasn't even started yet. So when you're creating these statuses, you can change the status category to whatever you need to. Because I have, I was demoing this myself and making sure that everything worked. As I was adding these statuses, they already existed in my system, so it already knew which status category to apply it to. But you want to make sure that as you're building your workflows, you are including them in the right status category. You can just do that by doing this edit option here. Okay, we have everything set up. Now we can touch on our transitions, which is where all of the magic happens. This is where a lot of the customization comes into play. This is where you can set conditions and properties and triggers and a whole lot of fun stuff. And you'll see that here, whenever you click on a transition, you'll see this little box pop up on the right-hand side, and it will have the list of different customizations and configurations that you can do to your transition. Starting with properties, this one is, I think, more of a higher level, advanced level of working with your workflows. This is you can set a key value pair, which is, similar to any kind of data that you want to set up, that you can use for integrations with other products. You can also set a key on here, a property, where if it is in a particular status, you can prevent people by putting a statement on here. You can prevent folks from editing the issue while it's in that status. And for example, you may want to do that if you're in the done status and you don't want anyone else to make changes to any of the field values while it's in done. If it's done, it should be done. It doesn't need to be touched. That's a little bit of a heavy-handed configuration, though. You never know. I mean, there might be instances where you could change stuff when it's done, change some values. So we're not going to go too far into that. And there's also triggers, which is used to automatically move an issue from one status to the next status. And this really comes into play, and it only applies if you have integration with a versioning system. For example, Atlassian has their Bitbucket product, which is where your developers can set up versioning. That's where they can do PRs and do some reviews and all that. So this is only available. These triggers are only available when you have an active integration with a tool like that. So essentially, if a pull request is created, or it's merged, or a pull request is declined, or a branch is created, or there's code that's been committed, you can use this trigger to move from one status to another particular status just based on the fact that those actions had occurred. So you might want to transition from to do to in progress if a new branch has been created, because usually that means that a developer has started working on something. So instead of going in here and having to manually update from ready to in progress, just by the sheer fact of having that branch created in the repository, it'll move the status for you, just less overhead. We always like to keep our developers happy, so just one less thing for them to do in terms of administration. if you have a pull request that is merged, you can transition from review to done, because if it's been merged, then it's been tested, it looks good, and it's now in your repository until they create another branch, and then you can have the automation and the trigger kick off the next status transition. So we can't touch on, I don't have a repository integrated with this, but I just want to let you all know that you can do that and help make your team happy without having them come back to your board and transition things manually. So conditions are really tied to permissions of users. So this is before a transition is made, it checks for these conditions on whether or not someone may or may not have the permissions to make that transition change. And I'll use that here in a second for one of our transitions. And I'll click on add condition here. You can see they give you a lot of different options for this. You can block transitions until they're approved. So if you need an approval for a particular transition, you can make sure that that's tied to this as well. You can make sure that this only assignee condition, if only the assignee of that issue can move from one status to the next status. So you might want to use that in your group if you have some Tasmanian devils in your backlog who are moving things between statuses without checking with who may be assigned to it. You can also do it for user groups. If you have a group of testers, you have a group of developers set up in your instance, you can make sure that if the developer can't move something from testing to final review, only testers can do that, which I'll show us here in a second. You can use that as well here. There's a lot of conditions. Like I said, you can customize to your heart's content. Atlassian does such a good job with providing the customizations, but as well as making it pretty easy for you to make those customizations. There's validators. So this is also before a transition occurs. This is similar to the conditions, but you can make sure that certain other things are done too. So comparing dates on the workflow transition, you can make sure that a field has a particular value or has a value at all in the workflow. And I'm going to use this in our workflow here too in a second. But I like to use, for most often I use this field required validator, because if there are fields that need to have values going from one status to the next status. If you are adding release notes to something, or if you're a tester and you found the resolution, you may want to input what the resolution was, what you found, what you fixed, or so you can send it back to the developers for them to continue to fix whatever bug there may have been. And then there's post functions. So this is what happens after you make a transition. So there are always these 5 post functions that are included on all of your transitions. These are static to Jira. You cannot delete these things. These are important functions that Jira uses to make sure that the back end is updated properly. But you can add post functions to this too, which I will also do as part of this demonstration to update certain field values. You can assign people. You can do a lot with your post functions, and all of these customizations I think help just with the overall overhead of working with your workflows. We're going to go back to our workflow, and I'll start adding some things on here for us to see. So when we go from ready to ready, we have this is ready transition. What I've done in the background already, and I'll show you if we have time, I created a screen that shows the user our definition of ready, as well as a checkbox to check off the fact that yes, we've read through the definition of ready. It is ready to go. We are ready to transition this, and that is a validator. I'm going to add the validator here. We're going to make sure that we check a box. We're going to make sure that we check that checkbox that is on that screen. And for now, I called that the DOR certified. So the checkbox is called DOR certified. We have to check that checkbox. And as far as an error message, you must check the DOR certified checkbox. So if they try to transition from to ready without checking that checkbox, it will not allow the transition to occur. We also need to add the screen to it as well, but I'll do that here in a second. As far as the post function, we also want to capture who it was that checked that checkbox. So we are going to update a custom field. So I have another custom field on here I called DOR. This is the certification user. And in here, they've actually given you a really good example of what to do if you want to do something like this. And we're just going to take this value. And what this will do is it will put the username of the user who clicked that checkbox and made the transition into that field. So if at any point in time we want to go in the future and say, hopefully it doesn't happen too often, but who was it who certified this thing? It's not ready to go. I can't believe that you certified it. So you can check on that too. Typically that's not used like that. It's just a good way to keep track of making sure that, you know, particular individuals are moving it to ready. And if you go to, so I'm clicking on the transition right now, there's this edit button. You can add the screen that I have on here. And the screen is a ready screen, this workflow ready screen. Again, it's named similar to our naming convention. It's the workflow screen. It's for the ready transition and when it was created. So you'll see over here, there is a screen between to do and ready. And we want to have a condition here. So again, like I mentioned before, we may only want particular individuals to actually move things between statuses because they have the right to, or they have the knowledge to. And it's part of moving something from testing to final review. We only want people within our testing team to be able to make that transition at this point. And again, some of these customizations may be heavy-handed. I think that leaving things less customizable, less kind of chained down, I suppose, is usually better. It's just better to have more open communication on the team than trying to lock things down in customizations. But I want to show you kind of what's available here. So in terms of a condition here, we want to make sure that only a particular group can make that transition. So we're going to say users in a group. And there's a group that I created in the back end of my Jira instance here that I called testers. So this condition will only allow testers to make the movement of the transition from testing to final review. And one last thing, there's another screen that I created for only for canceled. And as I mentioned before, there is a resolution field that needs to be set every time you move something to done. So we created this canceled status. It currently will not set the resolution on this field. So we're going to add a post function to this, that when the transition is made from any status to canceled, we want to make sure that we set that resolution field to a particular resolution. Or actually, no, I did this differently. Sorry about that. What I did here was I created a screen. So, and I guess I'll touch on this right now. Like I mentioned before, there's a particular area only for resolutions in your system settings. And they have it down here at the bottom called resolutions. And this is where you can go, you can create resolutions, you can edit the resolutions. These resolutions are out of the box from Jira. And again, it's important to know maybe why something was canceled. Is it something that you're just not going to do, which they have here, you're not going to do it? Is a duplicate of another issue that maybe you already have in your backlog? Are you just going to decline the fact that, you know, it needs to be developed? And we can have this resolution set either automatically, like I mentioned before, with a post function, or the way that I liked to do it was to add a screen that has the resolution field on that screen, so that when the user goes to cancel something, they can actually set the resolution to what it should be. So we've walked through our workflow. We make sure that that things are ready. Verify the fact that there's a checkbox on there that someone can click, and validate the fact that it's ready to go. Final review. I think I may have made a boo-boo here for a second. Hold on. I don't know if I saved. I may not have saved. It says 0. Getting ahead of myself. Oh no, it's there. Oh, I just need to refresh the page. Okay. All right. So we have our workflow. Let me refresh this. Now everything should show up. Yes, we have a validator, so we want to validate that it is ready to go. In order to move to final review, we have a condition where only the testers can move it to final review. And we have the certification here as well as our post function for moving something to ready. So anyway, sorry to get off track a little bit here. I'm trying to rush through this. I see that we're running out of a little bit of time here. So we have our workflow ready. It is currently inactive. It is not in a project. It is not tied to the project that we want it to be tied to. So in order to do that, we need to go to our workflow schemes. And I'll just show you here as well where we were working. So in the workflows section, we have active workflows and inactive workflows. We were just working with this workflow here. You can see it's not in use by any projects. It's not included in any schemes at all. We want to make sure that we do include it in the scheme for the project that we're currently working on. So I'm actually going to bring up our project again here. Make sure that we have the scheme. And what we can do is actually create a new scheme and apply the scheme to this project. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to add a new workflow scheme. Call this product solution projects workflow scheme. Add it here. And we want to add our workflow scheme. Was this one here? So this is our new user story workflow. And it lets you, again, it lets you set by issue type what should use that workflow. We only want this for stories right now. You'll see here that the story uses this workflow. All of the other issue types in this workflow scheme will use this basic workflow. Now we've added the workflow that we just created to this workflow scheme, but this workflow scheme is not in our project yet. So in order to do that, you head back to our project. You can hit switch scheme. Associate the scheme to this project, which will now have our workflow
Stephen,
in our project. You can see here.
Your screen. I glanced away and I looked back and I don't see your screen anymore. Is that, did I click the wrong button?
You might have, yeah, maybe so, because I'm
Are you still
able to
seeing
see
it?
the
Okay.
screen. Yeah, I see the
Okay,
screen.
cool. Got it. Yep, I found it. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. I just want to make sure.
No worries. No, I'm glad that you found your way back. So we're currently in our project. We have our new scheme set up in our project. It's available. We can go back to our backlog. We'll go ahead and create a user story here. But make the UI. something incredibly specific like that. So we'll have to make the UI here. And what we can do is we can add this to our active sprint. It's currently in the to-do status. So I hope this works. So if you remember what we did, we added a screen between to-do and ready. So if I transition this issue to ready, this is only for user stories. This is a screen that I created to pop up on that transition. So again, this is just a real quick definition of ready, just something I threw together. This is just a custom field in the back end that uses Jira's, what they call their wiki markup language. So you can create a table. So it's not just a big paragraph that's shown to the user, something they can actually understand. And it's a little more visually pleasing, I suppose. So we have this table here. Oh, yes, we went the acceptance criteria. Yes, we gave it a size. Yes, the team is ready to work on the item. I need to click on this. If I do not click on that certified, I certify this issue has a definition of ready, and I click here, we'll get our error message that I typed into that transition configuration. And if I do click certify, it is ready.
And that was called a transition screen?
That was called a transition screen, yes. And as you can see here, it gave me a little error at the bottom that my issue disappeared. It's no longer on my project. So what Regina had actually brought up before is something that we need to make a change to on our board. So again, when we created this project, it gave us just the default statuses. It gave us the default board, which is just our 3 statuses of to do, in progress, and done. So we transitioned that issue to a status that does not exist on our board currently, which is why it disappeared. That's easy enough to fix. So what you want to do here is you'll see we actually have those other statuses that we created in that workflow here. They're just currently in this unmapped column. So if we want to see them on our workflow, and you can see that it does indicate that there is one issue in this ready status. That's what we want. We also want to make sure our columns are in the correct order of our workflow. Otherwise, it could get pretty confusing here. So once I add this column to it, I need to associate the status to the column that it should be in. So we have ready. After in progress, we had our testing status. Then after testing, we had our final review status. We want to associate those statuses with these columns. And canceled, we don't want to show canceled on our board at all, so we're just going to leave it off to the side there. When we go back to our board, we will now see all of the columns on here. We have our item back here in our backlog, so it's reappeared. And we're going to go through the process here. We didn't have anything to move to in progress. Anyone can move it to in progress. We did have something for moving to testing, though. If you remember, we set it to only a particular group can move it to testing. I am in the testing group. I guess it looks like I thought that I had done this right, but this is what happens with a live demo. Move it to testing. What should have happened, which I need to double check here, is that if I am actually what may have happened here. Let me just verify this. Let me assign myself to it. I think that might be the other issue as well. So move through is ready. We've already certified it as ready. Transition to in progress. Yeah, maybe because I'm an administrator. Yeah, I don't know. This worked when I was trying it out. But anyway, if I were not a user in the testing group in the back end, this is why live demos are interesting. This was working just a couple minutes ago. I would not be able to make the transition from in progress to testing. Or was it from testing to, yeah, see. Final review. Oh, maybe it was testing to final review. That's what it is. Okay, so I don't have the ability, sorry, still getting mixed up. I don't have the ability to move from testing to final review. You see, I don't have that option. I can move it to canceled because anything can move to canceled. what I'm going to do here is I do have a user in the testers group. His name is Mike. I'm signed in as Mike on this other browser window here. I'm going to go to our project, go to our backlog, and see because I am in the testing group, I can move this to final review. But if you go back to the other screen, this other guy over here, Steve, he did not have the option. It's just not available at all. So we're going to go ahead and move it to final review. And let's say we made it all the way to final review. And oh my gosh, it's not right. The customer doesn't want this thing anymore. We just need to cancel it. So again, we created a screen to transition to cancel that will allow the user to set the resolution type. So, it turns out that we actually don't need to do this anymore. We're declining doing it at all, or we won't do it at all. You can leave your comments here. We ain't gonna do it. You can cancel it and it'll poof, go off your board. Now it's still available in the project. If you go to the issues and use your JQL, you can search for it. And you can still find it. It just won't show on our board because we did not include that canceled column on there. So I'm happy that worked as it was supposed to. And back over here, our board is empty once again. So that, now we're reaching the end of the line here. So I tried to do as much configuration, just kind of simple configuration as possible. I hope that everyone kept up with the workflow and trying to keep track of everything that was done. But that's about it for the demonstration. I don't know if anyone wants me to go into the custom field configuration at all, or to the screens that I created. I have the ready screen here, canceled screen, and some of the custom fields that I built in order to make those transition screens a reality. So yeah, that's it. Do we have any questions, comments? Are we excited about learning about workflows? Did we think of any ideas that we can apply to our organization? Anything that we think would be cool to implement? If anyone learned one thing about the presentation, then I will be happy with how today went.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. Definitely, we learned a lot. And actually, I worked as an admin for Jira at some point. And honestly, I didn't know that we shouldn't delete, because it might cause other issues with like if you're doing integrations. So I used to delete in some cases. So that's a very good tip. And also I have another question, Stephen. So in the case when we have releases, right? If we have releases and the release, it's a combination of different projects, right? Like 2 projects on Jira, and we have a release that includes work from both projects. So do you think Jira is a good tool to manage the release? Does it make sense?
Typically, so the way that Jira, again, this is the way that I use it too. Jira treats each project has its own release, and the items within that release are tied to that project. You can have multiple teams within that project that are all using different boards. But typically, I keep a release to a particular project. It's probably, this is something I'm going to have to learn. So thank you for pointing this out. We're all learning every day. You can, as far as I'm concerned, you probably can go here and we'll test it out live here. We can add an issue from another. Let's see. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Jira, it's more like project, like the focus on each project individually, right? But when we want to combine different projects and have one big release, because I was in a similar situation, and I used the dashboards on Jira. right? Like I created dashboards and work items from different projects, and that was how it was managed. But I thought there's a better way to do it, right? But maybe Jira is not the tool in that case. Maybe we would just need like a plan on MS Project, for example, right?
Yeah, it's a little crude, but you can always label issues for a particular release, and you can find them all, take you out.
That gets messy, right?
It can be.
Yeah.
If people don't, oh man, the amount of times we use a workflow to go fix labels that people mistyped or
Oh, labels, okay.
yeah. So I don't know if I would. You could, right? Because it's a tag that you could use to sort work. Can I ask a probing question that might be helpful? When you say that it requires multiple projects to get through a single release, is it because one team is working on the communications that are part of that release, and another team is working on the actual software, and a different team is working on maybe training materials, and they all have to go together to then create a full release?
Yeah, actually, the situation was, it was just one big project, but we had different teams working on it. For example, like back-end team, front-end team, but they were separate. But at the end of the day, we had to release together.
Okay, so I certainly have done that, where I've got a single team with multiple boards in the same team, and each board represents its own engineering pod that are doing separate work. But in order for a release to happen, multiple small teams combine their work into the release. And we would have a release train engineer using our safe agile practice, coordinating and gathering up which are the components that are going to fit into the next release, which ones are going to be ready by the right time, and then what are the qualifications that need to be performed before we would accept it for being part of that upcoming release cycle. So Jira certainly did that for us. Yeah, I think a single project with multiple teams, so separate Jira boards in that same project, would have a single releases page where you could then pull together stories from multiple teams into a single release.
Okay, yeah.
Somebody, correct me if that's not your experience. That's what I've done up till now.
Yeah, that's very similar.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think it's a great tool for what you've described then.
Yeah, but actually, because I tried it, I tried, like seeing like different boards, but Stephen, for some reason, they keep getting mixed together. So yeah, maybe we can chat offline about it, because I feel it's a long discussion, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dialia. Stephen, great job. Thank you so much. We're super excited.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Regina, for having us.
You're welcome. You're welcome. But don't go yet, guys, because what we normally do at the end of the meetup, we take a picture. And all we ask